are we? Just yell at me when we're ready. Oh, okay.
Anne is going to host you. We have cupcakes back there, so rather than have them go to waste, please eat one. They look gorgeous.
They're very good.
They also look like they might eat you, but I think
Yes.
they're supposed to be a rose. Please help yourself. Have a wonderful time, Rich.
Thank you.
Really, so
Thank
great
you.
to have
Get
you.
some rest.
I will.
Thank you so much.
Happy birthday to the store.
Yeah, we're really lucky. Gentlemen, we'll go ahead and put you on the hot seats. We're sort of live. So for those of you who are online, welcome. For those of you who are here, actually, I'm not going to be the host. I'm just sort of introducing these gentlemen. My name's Patrick. I'm the science fiction, fantasy, and horror selector here at the store. We are so lucky to have Richard and Bill Chizmar here for their newest book, Widow's Point. Richard is the author of how many books now? You've got you've got a lot out there. They're starting to stack up, and of course, you're probably Richard's best known probably for the Gwendy's Button Box series they co-wrote with Stephen King behind us. But if you've never read the Boogeyman series, it is one of my all-time favorite horror novels. It is fantastic. This is Bill's debut, and you've got a new book coming out really, really soon. So we're going to be talking about that here this fall. And I'm going to move aside and pass the microphone over to our friend and author, Brian McCauley, for Breathe In, Bleed Out. For those of you who want a more violent version of And Then There Were None, because that's exactly, we need more body count, more blood in the Agatha Christie novels. But actually, it's one of my favorite books of the year. So I would like to give a really warm welcome to Richard Chizmar, Bill Chizmar, and Brian McCauley.
Thank you so much for having us, and happy birthday to the Poison Pen. Yeah, so thrilled to be with you both today and talking about this awesome book. Yeah.
I feel like someone's behind us.
I know, he's just, Uncle Steve is always with us. He's just hovering, always just pushing his books. So Widow's Point, fantastic book that I want to go back to the beginning because reading the acknowledgments kind of brought to light the journey that this story has been on with y'all. So I was wondering if you could start just by kind of setting the stage for everybody about how it began back in 2017 and what the journey was to get to this novel.
Absolutely. Yeah, it started as a short story for a gentleman named Mark Parker who asked. He had published Billy's first short story while Billy was still in high school in an anthology called
Dark Harvest.
That's right.
Or Dead Harvest.
Dead
Remember.
Harvest. Yeah.
The horror anthology names, it's like Dark Something, Twisted Tales, I don't know.
Yeah. That Night and Chills, they're all together. Cemetery Dance was supposed to be called Night Chills, by the way. And at the very last minute, I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, there's too many nights and chills out there. So anyway, yeah. So Mark had published Billy's first short story when he was literally a kid, and he came back with this anthology of seafaring stories. And
Fearful Fathoms.
there you go. He remembers. And he said since he published Bill's first short story and he reprinted one of mine in there, he wanted to be responsible for our first collaboration. So it was actually his idea for us to write together. Neither one of us were brave enough to think of it ourselves. But so yeah, we thought everyone was going to write, sea monster stories or haunted pirate stories, that kind of thing. And honestly, we were too lazy to do a bunch of research about like the shipping vessels of the 1800 and all that, which would have been really cool. But we were both really busy, so we said let's kind of cheat a little bit and stay on land. So we said, how about a haunted lighthouse? And so yeah, that's he was in high school at the time, a senior. And we put together this 10,000 word story. He was really happy with it, made a few changes, and he put it in the book. Thought we were done. Then the next year, Billy went off to Maine, Colby in Maine, to go to school. And did I bug you about it, or did you bug me?
I feel like we kind of both bugged each other. I don't remember who bugged who first, but it was definitely just points in the day where, I'd be in the library doing homework, and I would just, put whatever my assigned reading was down and just start texting my dad and being like, we could do this with the Lighthouse, or it would have been cool if we had had a scene like this, and we just couldn't really stop talking about it.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of text exchanges, and so that led to a 20,000 word novella. So we went from a 10,000 word short story, 20,000 word novella. I ended up publishing it through Cemetery Dance because I thought, who's going to buy 20,000 words? And we were shocked because it got a bunch of good reviews. It sold a bunch of copies, and then to even more of a surprise, it ended up selling to we sold editions to I think Germany, Brazil, Spain. I think there were 5 countries who bought this little ghost story that we just wrote for fun. So it left us with a good feeling. And then, later on, I just thought, you know what, it deserves a book. We had so much fun doing it. Why don't we sit down and write an entire novel together? So that's kind of the, short story, novella. In other words, we milk the heck out of it. We're like Hollywood, we did 3 sequels in one. But no, that wasn't the intention. It really did come from a place of just, we enjoyed the process so much, and the ideas kept coming. For me, it was my first supernatural story after 30 years of writing. So, and I very quickly learned there's no rules in supernatural. So it's like, oh my, that shows how dumb I was. I'm like, all this time I'm being realistic and writing about, human monsters, and here we go. I can do ghost stories, and so, but still the first and only that I've done.
Yeah, and the that original novella is still in this book. It's like it's the part 1, sort of the first 20% of the novel, and then all of the new stuff we wrote over the past year is like the part 2, represents like that last 80% chunk of the novel. We really just kind of everything we wanted to explore that we didn't get a chance to in the part 1, we just kind of grabbed by the horns in part 2.
That's it, but that was gonna be my next question. Was the novella the Livingston part, and then you expanded from there? Because it's interesting because it's a multi-generational story written by multi-generational authors, so it feels very appropriate in that regard.
You know what? That's a great observation, because it really did play into the writing too. Yeah. Because people ask you, did you guys fight? I'm like, no, we never fought. Billy, there was only 2 instances, which did reoccur, but where Billy would get grumpy. One is when he was hungry. I could tell. I could tell when his comments started getting clipped and a little short, and he started, projecting the toot. I was just like, Billy, just go eat. He'd be like, all right. And he was gone. There was no discussion. That was one, and then the other is when Dad was using language for the cool hipster influencers. It's like, do you think what he knew them all? He doesn't follow them, but he knew them all. The Paul, Jake Paul, and all them, and then what is it, Mr. Beast? Yeah. I'm like, who the hell's Mr. Beast? But yeah, he'd be like, oh, he would groan. He's like, Dad, no, just let me write that dialogue. Other days, he's more than happy to let me tackle the 5-page dialogue scene, but not when it came to the young guys.
Yeah. Well, that kind of comes to my next question, which is, this being a found footage story with different kind of multimedia elements, and I feel like the 3 of us up here are placed in different decades, so we can kind of touch on, I remember when I was in middle school is when the Blair Witch Project came out, and I had a classmate trying to convince me, no, this is real. This is this real tape that people found. I was like, what? He was like, go to the World Wide Web and plug this in, and you'll see the website. They're missing people. And it was like, oh my God, this is real. So I'm curious for both of you what your kind of first touch points with the whole concept of found footage was, and how you kind of brought those together.
Blair Witch is definitely a big one. We're from Maryland, so Blair Witch takes place.
Burkittsville, right?
Yeah, like hour and a half, 2 hours away.
Yeah.
So it's honestly a shame we haven't driven and gone hiking in those woods yet. But Blair Witch was one of the very first. I'll let you talk about Paranormal Activity, because you've got a good Paranormal Activity take. But one for me was Grave Encounters. Which is a lesser known one about this, it's a horror movie about this television ghost hunting team what were they called? Taps was one of the ghost hunting shows. I forget what they were all called, but
Ghost Adventures, I think, is
Yes.
there's a big riff on that guy. Yeah.
But yeah, it was basically just like almost a parody of that, and then they come to this abandoned hospital or something that is actually really haunted, and you see it all through the lens of their TV cameras, and you see their whole crew freaking out, and it made it for me so real in a way, in just the dedication to the television format, in the way it presented itself. And then another one is Session 9, which isn't found footage, but it's about this crew of cleaners going into an abandoned asylum to remove asbestos and stuff. And one of the guys starts finding these old psychology session tapes that go to some really dark places. And, those found tapes, that idea of this place has its story told in the relics left behind, in the stories and the documents that the people who walk these halls left behind. That's what really took me. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, for me, Blair Witch was huge.
Yeah.
Like I had seen, but they didn't. I had seen like what was one of the originals? Was it The Last Broadcast?
Yes, The Last
Yeah, I had
Broadcast.
seen the Last Broadcast and enjoyed it, but it didn't. It didn't kind of ingrain itself in my soul. Blair Witch had such a buzz, and I had actually heard about it a little earlier because at the time, was it? I can't remember whether I had heard about it from Stephen King. And I don't remember whether it was post-accident. I don't know if somebody probably knows better than I do whether those dates match up or whether he was just very ill at the time. But I know he watched it. He got a way in advance screener and watched it in the hospital. Wow. And he just told me, this is going to scare the hell out of you. And then I remember I saw Blair Witch for the first time. We were on vacation in Myrtle Beach with the family, and the old guys went, and I was just like, whoa. And you could hear everyone talking about it afterwards. And, you had the sprinkling of, that was stupid. I want to kill that girl myself, But, man, it haunted me. And that last scene with, him in the corner, it was like etched in my brain for a while. So yeah, I mean, we've had a bunch, and Paranormal Activity. I know some people don't like it; they say nothing happened, but we did a big discussion the other day, and we were on a sofa, and people were laughing in the audience. They're like, "Dad, you guys can sit a little closer because we're sitting on opposite ends." And I'm like, "All right, I'm going to tell you a story about this. This is how we started the night we watched Paranormal Activity, opposite ends of the sofa." I'm like, and as the movie went on, we got closer and we got closer. And I'm about 40 minutes in, we're touching and our shoulders and we're leaning and we got a blanket on us now, one. And probably within, 10 minutes of that, we hadn't watched, we hadn't hit the 1 hour mark. I remember I looked at Billy and I said, what do you say we turn this off and finish it tomorrow in daylight? Yeah. So yeah, we're both big chickens, and just having that camera, as almost the silent narrator of the story, and this, you're seeing it through this objective lens has always been something that appealed to us. So yeah, for me, yeah, I mean, all those early ones, but Blair Witch is, even though that's the easy answer, it's the honest answer.
Yeah, and so. It's interesting because I write mostly slashers, which is very much a cinematic subgenre. Found footage as well. All of the reference points we're talking about are films, not books. Right. But both of these subgenres, especially very recently, have becoming big boom in literature, I feel like. Right. And I'm curious what your experience was from a craft perspective of trying to take that cinematic language and translate it into a literary language while still maintaining that sense of the found footage movie.
I'll give the short version, then you can. What's interesting is, and I always have to be blunt, and I'm like, look, he's a lot smarter than I am. So when we tackled the novel version, by that point, like I said, by the time we milked it through the short story and the novella and got to the novel, the whole found footage angle, was in the forefront of our thoughts. And everyone should be thinking, well, hey, dummy, you already wrote the short story version and the novella version in the same format pretty much. Shouldn't it have been from the beginning? And the honest answer is it wasn't. Once the reviews started coming out for the novella, that was the first time, because that phrase kept being repeated, found footage, found footage. And at some point I remember I looked at Billy and I'm like, I guess they're right, but it really does demonstrate how, at least for me, and I know now that Billy is becoming, a full-time writer, he said the same thing. We always feel like the story kind of dictates the manner in which it needs to be told. And I've told Billy many times, I'm like, once I get into a story and it really starts cooking, I just feel like I'm hanging on to the shirts, to the shirt tail of the story, and it takes me where it wants to take me. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're, I say he's smarter than I am. Maybe neither one of us are that bright, because it took a bunch of reviewers to kind of point that out. And I'm like, we had no intentions of doing something a little new or a little fresh. We started that way. That's how we saw the story, and we knew we had to carry it through. And we understood. We were like, in the novella, this isn't a spoiler, but you got to have some malfunctioning cameras. And then he turned to the voice recorder, and that's when he talked about session 9. That is something we talked about afterwards. Sound is so important to that movie. When I think of that movie, and someone in an audience this week said they have the soundtrack for it, and I'm like, I want nothing to do with the soundtrack. He's like, I listen to it while I write. I'm like, I don't want to listen to it ever again. I'll see the movie 5 or 10 times more, but I just I don't want to have that with the real world in front of me. I don't want to hear it, because it was really haunting and disturbing, and we tried to play into that. So yeah, I mean, it informed. It was a conscious decision as we went, but it really was the story that dictated it, as opposed to Billy and I sitting down at any point and saying, hey, we can do some really cool stuff with voice recorders and cameras and security cameras and all that stuff. It wasn't until the novel that we really kind of planned that out.
But then when we did get to the novel and we had that, that foresight of, okay, we're writing a found footage book here. This is a found footage story. There was so many exciting possibilities that came into play as we were, more focused on it and just more aware of it. And a lot of it is, the hardest part was just making sure you kept that objectivity and you kept your characters' voices out of the picture and out of the narration. And sometimes, we had to cheat a little bit, and, Trent or Steph's voice would slip into the narration just a little. But that was the great challenge, just trying to work around the objectivity and really just figure out how can we tell a story without reading people's minds like a narrator often does, or how can we tell this story just through dialogue like a movie. And, sometimes movie dialogue is just cheesy and you just accept it because it's a movie and you're like, okay, they gotta.
Brian's a screenwriter.
Yeah.
I've written a lot of cheesy dialogue.
Yeah.
In both movies and books, so yeah.
And and you do that in a book, and you turn it into your editor, and you come back with a dozen red pen marks that say no exposition and dialogue. So there was just a lot of challenges, because at one time we were kind of writing a screenplay, but at the same time it was a book, and at the same time it was neither.
Yeah, that was kind of be my next question of that whole, screenwriting being show, don't tell, but in books it's show and tell. You get to get inside the characters' heads, but being forced to be purely objective really can be very limiting. And so did you write a version just with all of the as a novel and then pare it back, or you very meticulously as you wrote were just keeping that guardrail on?
Yeah, no, we just tried and failed, because there were like Billy said, we would think a section was super clean and how it should be, as far as not all the nuts and bolts of it, but as far as the the found footage angle and sticking to that, and no, it would come back and he'd be like, you cheated here, you cheated here, you cheated there, and we would have to fix that.
One thing we did was and I think this is true in the original novella, there's a we narrator that's almost like the person watching these tapes and listening to these audio recordings
And then we
back.
see them as they,
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is very screenplay.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's how it originally crept in.
Right.
Yeah, and so originally we did have that, like, the sense that, like, there was a narrator, and it was like someone who was, you know, like watching the Blair Witch tapes in a police. It was like the police officer watching the Blair Witch tapes, trying to figure out where these kids went or something. It was sort of like that. And then as we went into the novel and you know, started on that version, it became clear to us that, you know, we could go all in on the objectivity of the camera and really lean on the technology as our narrator. And it was a lot of fun. It was, you know, definitely challenging, but
Yeah, when you asked if it felt limiting, it actually felt more fun and challenging than it did limiting, and because it was kind of something new for us, and you know, when you watch a movie, there's so often you're like, you know, don't do it, don't, you know, Jamie Lee in Halloween, you're like, don't, you know, don't drop the thing, you know, don't drop the knife, don't, you know, look behind you, and
or in Paranormal Activity, you can see the pots swaying on the rack behind
or that
her.
ghost when she's studying, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as writers, we found ourselves doing that.
Right.
You know, even though we were the ones creating it, there was that sense of turn around. Come on, turn around, but we couldn't have them turn around. You know, we as the camera's eye saw it, but they didn't. And so yeah, that was the kind of fun we had with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that ended up kind of being a surprise for us as we went on.
Yeah.
And there were other little surprises too, like file names and time codes suddenly became like in I've been bugging him to give me a copy of Jurassic Park because someone told me it made spreadsheets really scary because you know they have like the expected number for every dinosaur, and then it's like, oh, there are hundreds of more raptors than expected. And that's like a jaw-dropping moment when
Was
you
that
read
Bev
it.
Vincent who told you that?
No, but he was like he approved.
I say, if anyone knows Bev, he's the professor. He really is a scientist. So I call him the professor. But.
But you know, there's just opportunities like that to find moments for scares and little tricks and little moments of fun in opportunities and formats that neither of us would have ever considered had we not been working in those confines.
Yeah, well, at a certain point in the book, you're also essentially playing like film editors because there's multiple characters having their stories, and you're intercutting back and forth to the different cameras and building tension the way that you would as a film editor, right? And in a book, normally you would have to like, okay, new chapter, reset, new character perspective, but the way that you navigated it felt very cinematic in that way, which feels like it felt very intentional of like, okay, then we're going to cut away just at this point and come back to these characters. Was there a lot of revising that kind of stuff, or how did you approach that intercutting?
Yeah, I mean, the neat thing is because of the format, and you can see like some of these scenes are, you know, that long, a paragraph long, and others are 2 or 3 sentences, and then we might have a page or a page and a half. So it really did lend itself to playing around with that kind of pacing and that kind of building tension, and because of the format, again, it was really easy to, just like screenwriting, to go back and insert scenes. And I mentioned earlier this week that for the first time ever, I found myself that we actually wrote a couple scenes out of sequence. You know, Billy was pounding away, you know, at this part of the narrative, and he was, you know, in sequence like you usually are. And I was excited about a scene that I knew was coming, and it was so much easier to just say, hey, Billy, I'm going to cheat a little bit and write this scene, and then we'll just plug it in like a puzzle piece later. And, you know, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Or just show it to me, and then I can write up to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I can lead in.
So yeah, no, I mean, that's an awesome observation because it really was. In a lot of ways, it was like, you know, doing. Some screenwriters will note card it, you know, and they'll stick them all up there, and then they'll start rearranging and all that. And I've always admires guys who can do that, because if I did it, it would be a mess. It'd be chaos. You know, the critics would be like, you know, it was wonderfully and, you know, wonderful and intelligent because the way he did it out of order, and I'd be like, you know, I just got my note cards mixed up or something. But yeah, it was fun. You guys are gonna get tired of me hearing the word fun, but to me, if you're going to collaborate, number one, it really should be a good time. Otherwise, you know what? It's better to just stay in your own little corner and play God yourself and own all the mistakes. And this way, I had him to blame him on the mistakes, and
That's the best part of it.
I could take all the credit for the good stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm older and
That's the best
wiser.
part of being a screenwriter too. Is like the director really dropped the ball, man.
Oh my God! Yeah, I didn't even want my name on it by the time he got to it. And that's someone who like co-wrote Roadhouse 2, by the way, right here.
And so did you have, especially when you made the decision to go from novella to expand into a novel, did you work together to create a story outline of any kind, whether note cards or written, or was it more kind of by the seat of your pants? And if so, then how did you do that? Like, did you take turns writing up to a point and then see, all right, where's he going to take it? And I'll see where I take it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because it actually kind of evolved with the iterations of the book. The short story version, when I was the most inexperienced, was very much more like cut and dry. He took the first half of the story, I took the second half, and then through the editing process, we blended them together and, inserted stuff into the other section. But it was still, we could still tell who had written what to a certain extent. And then by the time the novella was out, that was just completely no longer true because we had both gone in. We had a beginning and an end, so both of us could just go in anywhere we wanted and just, I'm going to insert something here. He went and inserted an entire plot line in different spots. The whole Delaney Collins diary was first in the novella, and he put that in. Just he spent like a few days just seeding that throughout.
Right.
And I went back and I just punched up a bunch of sections, added some stories, and by the time we were done with that, it really just kind of became a blur of who had written what, and it was really more of just, we were just putting in whatever we thought was fun. Like he said, you're gonna get tired of hearing that word, but we were just every trope we loved, from Straub's Ghost Story and Hill House and Hell
Scooby-Doo.
House and Scooby-Doo. We threw them all in there, called it our everything but the kitchen sink story.
Every time I mention Scooby-Doo, I know the folks at Simon & Schuster are like groaning. They're like, you can't tell people they're paying $29 for Scooby-Doo. And I'm like, but at some point I looked at Billy and I'm like, we're just writing a really cool episode of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Because the guy in the van, which I'm not going to give too much away, he's our Shaggy.
Yeah.
But yeah, we by the time we came to the novel, we knew we wanted the YouTubers. We knew we wanted the professor. We wanted a more academic approach, and which is steal that from Richard Matheson and 10 other guys.
We knew we wanted to bring Rob the Ghost Hunter back from the Reddit thread that ended the novella.
And yeah, so we knew we wanted those connective threads, but we did not discuss much of anything. What we mainly discussed were the characters,
Right.
and how we thought they would evolve or not evolve. Who, there were decisions like how likable do we want to make Trent, who is the main YouTube influencer, and or do we not want to, and how realistic do we want to go there? We would have breakfast every Monday. We would take Billy's dog and go eat outside in our little town and talk about characters, but we never talked about what came next.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a set page count or word count. We just kind of traded when we were ready. And sometimes Billy would be like, Dad, big dialogue scene coming up, you write it.
Yeah.
I would be like, we need a lot of energy for this next, few pages, you write it because I'm old. Yeah, and that was fun. It was, I'm not going to say it anymore. It was, in that regard, it was just exciting to not have, any guidelines to follow. And I always say, it's kind of old news by now, but I always say, collaborating to me is like a marriage. It's like the ultimate exercise of faith.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, you're screwed. And with collaborating, it was the same thing with King. We had 50 page. We'll trade after every 50 pages, but that was it. We never once talked about what came next. We didn't ask each other to, hey, make sure you do this, do that. It was just, you had that trust and that sense of adventure, and that's when collaboration's at its best, I think.
Love that. I have one more question that I'll ask before I'll turn it over to the audience. and I've mostly asked about process and craft questions because I don't want to spoil really anything about this book, because I think it's good to just go into cold. But I do have one question, and I don't think it's a spoiler, but there's baked into it this concept of the haunted house as a tumor. And I loved that metaphor, and I'm just curious where that came from. And yeah,
The smart one.
Yeah, it was, Catherine Durand, our professor character. She's sort of her like tagline is the foremost expert on haunted houses that doesn't believe in haunted houses. She approaches it from a sociocultural perspective and is sort of asking the question, like, why do so many people all over the world like take these, bad memories of a town or tragic events or historical trauma, whatever the reason may be, and why do the townspeople push it into one house, one location, and why does it take on that status as a haunted house? And she talks about it as a tumor. Her book in the universe is called Spiritual Tumors, and I think it was just sort of, natural, just partially because, my dad's a cancer survivor, which I'll let him talk about if he wants to. I mean, you don't have to.
Show you my scar.
So, it's always been, something in the back of my head that's just, part of my family history. And it's a primal fear,
I was
too.
gonna say it's this very visceral, like, ugh.
Like it goes back all the way to, and she talks about this in her fictional book. The study of cancer goes all the way back to, ancient Egyptian times when they had like cauterizing irons to try and like remove breast cancer tumors and stuff like that. And, one of the very first descriptions of cancer is translated as there is no cure. And, it's just sort of one of these it's the greatest, most sort of malignant sickness and most widespread humans face. And it's all about something mutating into something ever so slightly different and then just taking over. And that's just what I kind of felt like was happening to the Lighthouse. And
he's extremely well read and just knows some wild stuff and some stuff that I'm better off not knowing because I like to sleep. So when he came up with that, he showed me some of the sections, and I was blown away. And what did it for me is what you just said. It's like every small town has a haunted house. Why? And here's a different version of why. And I liked that, and I thought that would be good to have. That because of her background, she became a little bit more than just someone that Richard Matheson and these guys have already done before. So I like that, and that it was very non-Scooby-Doo-ish in that regard. So and I knew it might make us look a little smart. So this is the only place I'm giving him the credit for it, by the way.
Love it. All right. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for our authors here tonight?
Tom, you're a writer. You better have a question.
I don't.
Oh. No, that's good.
Do you guys get sick of each other?
I did just tell Brian earlier that we are much better writing partners than traveling partners.
Yeah, the traveling's actually been much better than I thought until they gave us an electric car today. I've never driven one of those, so it takes a little bit to get used to, that whole roller coaster kind of thing. So yeah, he's like, I'm car sick.
In the front seat.
Yeah, I'm like, you want to drive? No.
That thing's like a go-kart.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, we're lucky. We get along with all this stuff. And like I said, I was being serious before. It's like the only time I really sensed grumpiness or attitude while we were writing is when he was hungry. And that the kitchen wasn't far. We ended up doing a lot of writing. We never wrote together until we went over that last pass of editorial notes. And then we sat, for some reason, with all the places we could have gone, we sat at the dining room table, and my laptop in front of me, his in front of him, and then a printed out version in between us.
Yeah.
And we went over every note, and then when we got to the ending of
Last 500 words.
yeah, we wrote like the last 500-600 words together.
Him sitting at the dining room table and me just kind of pacing around, dictating ideas or leaning over his shoulder to see what we had. But yeah, no, we really got along. it was mostly just like technical issues where, you know, he just couldn't figure out Microsoft Word, and I would just be like, okay, I'll come downstairs, give me 10 minutes, I gotta finish this section.
Or me saying, where did my scroll bar go?
Oh my God.
Well, if you rewind back further, it gets worse than that, by the way. I this is probably 3 years ago. I was like, my scroll bar just disappeared. I obviously hit the wrong button at some point. So within a couple days of being without my scroll bar, I had convinced myself that the scroll bar never existed in the first place. So my work in progress, when I started every morning, I would have to hit the down arrow.
How many pages was it?
Oh God,
A lot. No, this is a true story too. See, I'm not real concerned with looking smart, obviously. And at some point, on probably like day 20, my wife looked over my shoulder one morning, and she said, "What in God's name are you doing?" And I said, "How else can I get to to start where I left off?" And she's like, "The scroll bar." And I said, "I don't have one anymore." And she leaned a little further and did like. And boom, it was back. And I just, so yeah, that story has been told many times in my family and outside of my family. But that is, yeah, I struggled with those kind of things, and he would just shake his head and be, like, Jesus, Dad. But yeah, other than that, man, we had a lot of fun, and we're going to hopefully we'll do it again. And yeah, it was a cool process. Even, other collaborations I've done, obviously there's so many opportunities to learn and to see people's processes and the choices they make. Right in the moment, and then you transfer that into a father and son relationship, and it's even more special. And then, as the father, to find yourself actually learning things from the son. I've always said, I think the key to being a good dad is opening up and communicating and being willing to learn from your kids, which I did tremendously from both of my sons. But from a craft perspective, that was really cool.
Yeah.
To see him make some choices and be like, oh my God, he's right. He's 100% right, and I wouldn't have thought of that. And thank you. So yeah, it was a good time.
And you mentioned tackling the editorial notes. How did they or did they not differ from a more traditional novel with this book? Like, did your editor have very different type of feedback, or was it the same kind of notes you would get on a novel? I mean, a traditional novel? Some
of it, our editor is Ed Schlesinger, who's awesome. I mean, I love him. He's edited, pretty much every big book that I've written, and he drives me crazy. He was in the audience at one of these early in the week, and I gave him such props, and every bit of it he totally deserved. But he would drive me crazy with, in this book, just, how can they see? Isn't it dark? That kind of thing. Those kind of things, which are super smart, and that's what that's why you are a top editor at a top publisher in New York. But every once in a while, I just wanted to say, I'm cheating, Ed, and let me do it. Our comments on the right side of there, of whatever the hell it's called. I always told Billy, I'm like, look, at the end of every book, you go through them before you send it in, because your mood varies greatly from day to day. Yeah. And some of those comments are a little too pointed. And I'm like, and I taught him the wonder of already addressed. 2 words. You can put them in there, and they're honest, and it's just your way of saying, done, on to the next. Yeah. But the comments were more technical with this. Right. They were like, yeah, you're cheating. How would the camera know this? You need to do it differently.
The most frustrating ones for me were like when we were describing like a character's emotional state, which you could just Steph stormed off, annoyed or something, and he would be like, "How can the camera tell she's annoyed?" Which is like, okay, fair question, but. This
you
isn't
want to say she stormed off appearing annoyed,
or it might not be.
Boy, am I annoyed?
Yeah, yeah. That's the.
I'm annoyed and I'm storming off.
Which sometimes that was literally the change he made was, boy, am I annoyed, and we were just like, okay, we'll find another way to address this. And sometimes it was just like, I can't put in a sentence describing how annoyed she looks just because it'll ruin the flow. Yeah. So there was a lot of just like stuff like that little character details that would have normally in a normal narration have been totally okay, but because we were working with the camera, they had to be just a little more closely examined. And a lot of the time I was just like, you know, it's implied, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with all that said, real quick, just in case Ed's watching, now we gave him such props, and he actually got embarrassed. He's like, "Oh, you don't have to say that." He made the book so much better. I mean, you know that. It's like you get your editorial notes, and you're always like, "What?"
Yeah.
And then I always tell my agent, I'm like, "Look, I get them, and I'm like on the phone with her. I'm like, yeah, I might take advantage of 20% of them, something like that." And then 2 days later, I'm up to 40.
Yeah.
And then like 2 weeks later, I'm like, "Oh my God, Ed's a genius! Thank God! Don't ever let me go anywhere else. You know, he made this book so much better. I could never do it without him."
Yeah, I had a student ask me about this process just yesterday and how you navigate notes like that, and I was like, you sit with it for like at least a week before you go back to actually do the work, because your first reaction is just gonna be like, nah. But then you come back to it and you're like, oh, yeah. It's a good idea.
And what's interesting is, again, as someone who's been doing it for a while, and then here's my son who you know is out there with solo books now, and he's actually going through the same editorial process with his first novel called Them. Even though Levidian published it as a hardcover limited, he sold it to Simon Schuster, so now it got the full editorial treatment. Yeah. And what's interesting is you want him, like you said, sit with it for a little bit and then go in there and be ready to do some hard work and dig into it and make it better. But as the dad and also the more experienced guy, I'm like, I want to make sure you pick your spots to be stubborn.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what he said was one of the most invaluable parts of doing this together, is he could see where, you know, you're going to pick your hills to die on.
Yeah.
And where you just got to say. And again, Ed's wonderful with that, because his whole thing is always, it's your book. You have to be completely happy with it. So you know, feel free to hit back and to push back, and we'll talk about it. And it's your decision. I just want to make sure I get, you know, my 2 cents in there. And that's the thing I keep reminding Billy. It's just, don't get too agreeable. I know you're happy you got a contract all by yourself, and you're going to see your book at all the bookstores. It's a great feeling, but make sure that what's on the shelves there is what you're really happy and proud of. So
That's great.
And that comes from I'm stubborn as hell. So
Yeah.
oh, here we go.
So you started out with a short story, went to a novella. I've read the novella. I haven't read the full novel yet. Now it's a full novel. Are you really done? Because I know, like, Wendy's turned into a trilogy.
But none of them.
Begin turned into a trilogy.
I know.
Are you really
It says The Complete Haunting.
I know.
So, I mean,
that was Ed's title, and he was right. And then, see, the thing is, and none of them started out as after Gwendy. People said, "Is there going to be another one?" No. And if my original ending was in there, it wouldn't have been. But God bless Steve; he's much smarter than me. And he's like, when I sent it, he's like, "Rich, this is too dark." And I remember thinking, "You're Stephen King, man. You had somebody eat themselves on a deserted island, you know." But he was right, and there never would have been a book 2 or a book 3 if I didn't listen to that. And same thing with Boogeyman. People asked all the time. I'm like, no. And then I'm out there mowing the lawn, and I think of chapter 1 in Becoming. It just, boom, it came to me with just fully formed everything. And I thought, I really want to write that even if there isn't a second book. And I thought, if I pull that off and I do it justice, anyone who reads that first chapter is going to want to read that rest of that book as fast as they can. So that's how the second one came. And then that one I was actually smart enough to end on the cliffhanger. But none of those series were on purpose, and this one wasn't, and we had no intentions. This is The Complete Haunting. But then we started thinking things, and I wrote down just a few notes, and then Billy came in and made them really good.
It's hard to let go of those characters, isn't it?
So we'll see.
Well, it's not even the characters. It's just the lighthouse and the town. Yeah, exactly. In the town of Harper's Cove, it's that this just, you know, quaint little Nova Scotia fishing town that we've both just really fallen in love with.
Yeah, so Billy had this great idea of how to turn it into like Salem's Lot, not with vampires, but to really have the evil spread those tentacles out from the lighthouse. And I told him, I said, you know, this is going to be a lot of work. We had a very confined cast, we had confined settings, and now you want to take it to the whole town? And he's like, yes. And I was like, you know what, we can probably sell that. So yeah, I think there will be more.
I love it.
We'll see.
Any other questions from the audience?
So why ghosts? What is it about hauntings and ghosts that scare you?
I had never, that's the thing, I had never written about ghosts. I had, in almost 100 short stories and a bunch of novellas and all, and then several novels. I'd never written anything that was like overtly supernatural. And I remember one of my early reviews for a collection, the reviewer, it was Ed Bryan in Locus, when he was still with us, he wrote, he said something to the fact of, of how well I write about human monsters. And the handful of short stories that hinted at the supernatural, you could kind of tell that the author, in his words, he was saying, you could kind of tell that the author wasn't fully buying in yet on that whole aspect of it. So I think I stayed away from it for whatever reasons. To me, the human monster has always been scarier. The idea that we all wear these masks and what's behind them, who knows. But once we decided to do a haunted lighthouse because we didn't want to write about ships and monsters out in the sea, it just became, it just consumed us. And like you said, it was everything but the kitchen sink. So we took everything we had ever seen or read about ghosts, and we kind of made it our own and put it in here. But as far as like literally ghosts, I'm a believer. I've always been a true believer. I had a Bigfoot shirt on earlier this week, so we talked about Bigfoot for like 20 minutes, and I told everybody about how, when I was a kid, there was a Bigfoot, display in the library, and they brought in this Bigfoot hunter from Oregon, and I had my best friend fake it's horrible. I had him fake a medical condition to create a diversion so I could run behind. I was like 10, so I could run behind the display, and he had some.
You were 12.
He had some authentic Bigfoot hair tacked to his bulletin board, and I had to have that hair. So, yeah, I was a thief, but I took like 5 strands, and how the 5 strands turned into 4, and ultimately, they were in my sock drawer. Ultimately, I lost the final, Bigfoot hair, which he always told me, Rich, it's clearly fishing wire spray painted black, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's Bigfoot hair. You can tell it even smells like a Bigfoot. But I've always been a true believer. The haunted house, I just, I'm not buying that the town put it there. I'm like, no, it's the real deal. So, for me, whether they're good ghosts or bad ghosts has always just been the question. The fact that, whether they really exist has never been in question. I'm still scared of the dark, man. I got the perfect job. If I'm not doing what I'm doing, I'm in trouble. I don't know what else would be, that I would have succeeded at. But I'm the kid who believed in all that stuff and tried his hardest to convince everyone else that it was real, who still does. So I'm a pretty lucky guy.
That's awesome.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
When you were both writing, how much research do you guys put into your story?
With Widow's Point, some of the a good chunk of the research got delegated to me, just because I'm fresh out of college. I like research a lot. I did a lot of research we both did on how lighthouses work, the day-to-day routine of a lighthouse keeper. A lot of the aquatic stuff. My mom's side of the family grew up on the Chesapeake Bay, so a lot of the fishing stuff and just the idea of fishing tales and tall stories from fishermen was just always a part of my life.
My first question was, do lighthouses have bathrooms? I was all about that. I'm like, wait a minute. So
we were thorough on that. But yeah, just a lot of the fun part about this one was that so much of our research was just very grounded and very practical. And if you looked at our Google search history, we could have just been researching for a book about lighthouses, and a historical fiction about a lighthouse keeper falling in love with the local dressmaker or something like that.
Like things like that, like making sure that dressmakers would actually be something that they did then during that time period in a little town like that, as opposed to we wanted to be as accurate as we could be, whereas usually if it was a short story or something, I would have made it up.
But yeah, it usually just depends on the story, what that looks like for me anyway. I know when you wrote Gwendy's Final Task, you want to talk about that?
I mean, that was after I got over the excitement of Steve sending me like 20 texts one day and saying, I have an idea for a 3rd book. Do you have time? And and then going all down the list of, what his idea was. And so after I get off, I put the phone down and I'm like, this is cool. We're going to write another book together. Dream come true, again. There was that moment where I looked up and I'm like, but what the hell do I know about space? Why has she got to go to space? And my dad, who knew everything about space, hasn't been with us for about 10 years. So I had that moment of melancholy. But still, it's like you talk about ungrateful. There was that split second where I was like, "Really, Steve? He's got to be in space." But again, you talk about learning from someone. Number one, he's got Robin Firth, who is the world's greatest research assistant. But then the other thing, several times I was like, "Steve, what about this? What about this?" And he's just like, "Rich, we're gonna make it up." And I was like, "That's the best part."
But those readers who have been to space will be like, "That's not how it is."
That's what he said. He's like, "We can mess up on space. We just can't ever make a mistake about a gun."
Yeah.
Because you will hear from everyone. And I've had that before. I'm like, "Rich," I've had someone say, "Rich, you know what? You kept saying pistol. It couldn't be a pistol. It had to be a revolver." And I'm just like, "Okay."
So online we have a couple questions, and they're really curious, Richard, about where your short story From the End of the World as We Know It came from, and what it was like writing in the Stan's universe, because you've probably been the closest author to working with Stephen.
Yeah. What's interesting is I was really busy when that book was put together, and I almost had to pass on the idea of writing it, and I'm so glad I didn't. It would have been dumb. And it was my agent who was like, "Rich, just stop, just write the darn story," because I was telling her, I was like, I might have to pass. And I found out at a Pennsylvania signing for that book, I found out that I broke every rule. I was late. I exceeded the word limit, and I included original characters from the original novel, which we weren't supposed to do either. So fortunately, they let me get away with it. But yeah, I mean, it was awesome to do that. It was weird because, yeah, unlike all the others, I had already written about Castle Rock. I had brought, technically I'd written about how Castle Rock was rebuilt after Needful Things. I had brought Derry. I was the one who brought Derry into Gwenny's final task. You talk about we talked about how we never talked about what came next, and I'll never forget that. I wrote it. I wrote my 50 pages. I sent it. I brought back Derry. I talked about the canals. I referenced the clown, the whole thing, and then I sent it to Steve. And then I had that moment of terror where I was like, I just brought back Derry. Not brought back the town, but I brought Derry into the story. What am I doing? Maybe I should have asked him if that was okay. But he true to his nature, which is very generous and also, almost childlike in his excitement for writing and creating. He loved it, and then he instantly made it better, which made me so happy. Because I always felt like I wanted Derry in that story. But there was a part of me that was just like, this is my only chance I'm ever going to have to write about Derry, so I'm doing it. But yeah, so it was a little different. The long-winded answer, it was a little different for me, but it was still totally special. And my idea for that story was always just, when you're a teenager, that you have those days where you're just like, I wish everyone in my town would disappear, or I wish everyone in my family would disappear. This guy kind of had that come true, where he was the only one left in this little, Connecticut town. And my idea for the story was always that, the water tower was symbolic of his own personal solitary viewpoint of what was left of this world. And I was intrigued by the idea of having a fairly pivotal moment in the original Stan be viewed from this objective, narrator, who doesn't know exactly how pivotal it is, or that the song he can't get out of his head was written and performed by the guy in the tent on the hill that he's watching. So I just, I loved the idea that Steve's novel was out there going on its way, and this short story was over here, and they kind of, for a brief period of time, crossed paths and then went on their separate ways. I like that. Anybody else?
Well, I think we're at the hour point, aren't we, Brian?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got actually 3 books to give away tonight.
Oh.
So tonight I'm going to say goodbye to our online people. They'll watch us for a moment, but we've got 3 books, 1 through 8. So Brian, I'll have you choose a number. Richard, you choose a number. Bill, you choose a number, and we will be giving out some free books. We got some good horror tonight.
7.
All right.
Hey.
Excellent. All right, so you're going to get William by Mason Cole. All right, who had 7? Excellent. I don't know that either. Oh, no need. All right.
My number's 3.
3. Excellent. All right. You get How to Survive a Horror Movie.
That's good.
5.
Excellent. All right. The Supernatural Crimes Unit, NYPD, comes out in October, published by Weird Tales.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So for the fun part of the evening, we do ask you to go ahead and pick up your chairs and put them against the side near the cookbooks. And then everybody can get in line. Get your books signed by Brian, Richard, and Bill. Let's give these gentlemen a big round of applause.
Thank you all.